Hello and welcome to the second part of the ultimate Christmas wish list. What if you could get what you're really hoping for? By Rico Tice. And tonight, well, I say tonight, it's midnight on the 20th of December. I really wanted to get this out earlier, but it will be out in the morning. And I'm covering chapters 4 and 5 and what's next, and we're reading about 20 pages. So, chapter 4, Purpose. Have you heard of Blue Monday? Maybe not, but you've probably experienced it. It's the third Monday in January. Next year it'll be the 20th. And it's reputed to be the least joyful day of the year. Christmas is over, the credit card bills are dropping, the post-festive food diet is underway, the batteries in the presents need replacing, the New Year resolutions need replacing too, and it's still dark outside. The mad rush for Christmas Day is done. The fun of New Year is past. All that effort and still January comes. And still it feels the same as the last one did and the next one will. The thing about Christmas is that it doesn't really change anything apart from your bank balance. On Blue Monday, people find themselves wondering, what was it all for? The third Monday in January is not, of course, the only time people feel that way. Long ago, I, the author, went to a school reunion. I found myself in conversation with an old schoolmate, and we replayed for each other the 35 years since we'd left school. My friend was brutally honest. I've spent my life just going from one thing to another, he said. I've just lived. It felt to him like it had been a bit empty, like it had been a bit of an anticlimax. What was it all for? I remember feeling something similar myself when I was clearing out my parents' house after they died. They'd had full lives, good lives. The house was full of the signs of 2 lives well lived. But as I looked around at all the trophies won, all the milestones marked and all the Christmases celebrated, I just thought, what did it matter? The reality of death suddenly made the preceding 8 decades of life seem strangely meaningless. My parents were here, and then they weren't. What was it all for? Here is the problem. All of us hope that our lives mean something. We want to make a difference, to leave a legacy, to build something worthwhile. Having a sense of purpose in life is what gets us out of bed in the morning and what pulls us through the tough times. But what actually is your purpose beyond just living? And if you find one, can it survive you eventually dying? The fact is that things end. Christmas comes and goes. Seasons of life pass us by. And life itself flickers and ultimately fades. It sounds depressing, but it's true. As clearing out my parents' house showed me, death mocks everything we achieve and accomplish and accumulate. And that's why every culture in history has had to find a way to deal with the reality of death. Here's how 21st century Western societies do it. First, we deny it. We just pretend it's not there. Near where I live, there's a great playground. My kids love it. For centuries, though, there was a cemetery on that site, right in the middle of the community. But then they moved the cemetery miles away, behind a high wall, away from sight, and they put a playground in instead. It's symbolic of what we do with death as a culture. We hide it. We pretend it won't happen. Second, we try to downplay it. Think of all the ways in which we describe death to make it sound less final, less of a full stop. We pass away. We go upstairs. We fall off our perch or shuffle off this mortal coil. We become an angel in heaven or a star in the sky. anything to stop it sounding so final. We like it when we read Professor Dumbledore remarking in one of J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter books that, to the well-organised mind, death is but the next great adventure. But then reality intrudes. We go to a colleague's funeral. A loved one dies. We ourselves get a terminal diagnosis. We can't deny death's reality any longer or downplay how much it hurts. Death is not an adventure for those left behind. It's agony. Death robs us of our loved ones and people like that. People who love us and are always there for us are hard to come by. When we have to confront that reality, all that's left is to start to despair about death, because death drains life of meaning. Jean-Paul Sartre, the 20th century atheist philosopher, was commendably unafraid of looking at the reality of death and drawing the logical conclusions of his beliefs. He wrote in his novel Nausea, "Nothing happens while you live. The scenery changes, people come in and go out, that's all. There are no beginnings. Days are tacked on to days without rhyme or reason, an interminable monotonous addition." That's what Sartre thought, but few of us want him to be right. Not many people really want to live as though there is no real reason for existing, no meaning to be found in all our successes and struggles. Yet if life ends with death, then Sartre is right. So to find meaning in life, we need an answer to death. No body. That's the first subheading. By the end of the day we call Good Friday, Jesus seemed like the last place to look for any answers when it comes to death. He had made some big claims. He had achieved some notable things. He had stirred up hopes and dreams, and then he had died. His body was laid in a tomb, and a huge stone was rolled over the entrance. It was all over. That was Friday, but Sunday was coming. And the belief at the heart of the Christian faith is that on that Sunday morning, something extraordinary happened. Something that can rob death of its power and give life the purpose we long for. Here's how the final chapter of Luke's Gospel begins, Luke 24. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. Can you imagine what these friends of Jesus were feeling as they hurried to his tomb on that Sunday morning? I would guess it was a mixture of grief at the death of their friend, fear of the authorities who had killed him, and hopelessness because they dared to hope that this particular friend was in fact the mighty God and the Prince of Peace. But now he was lying cold and lifeless, enclosed behind a massive stone. Everything seemed to have gone wrong. But to this grief, fear and hopelessness is about to be added shock. From Luke 24 verses 2 to 8. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were wondering about this, suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. In their fright the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee? The Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the 3rd day be raised again." Then they remembered his words. No stone at the entrance, no body in the tomb, and 2 angels appearing in clothes that gleam like lightning. If you're at a loss at the mention of angels, you aren't alone. The women fall flat on their faces when they encounter them. They know this is not normal. And then comes the news that is going to change their lives forever. That's going to change the world forever. 7 little words. He is not here. He has risen. Jesus is alive. That's the declaration that lies at the heart of Christianity and on which the whole of the Christian faith stands or collapses. Jesus died and then came back to life. Evidence or prejudice? If you find this very hard to believe, I'm not surprised. It's hard to believe that a man rose from the dead. It just doesn't happen, and people in those days knew that. Verses 9 and 11 of Luke 24. When the women came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11, the disciples, and to all the others. But they did not believe the women, because their words seemed to them like nonsense. None of Jesus' friends leapt to illogical conclusions. First century people knew just as well as we do that dead people do not rise. It's against the laws of nature. And yet, in the space of a few weeks, those same men who had dismissed the resurrection as nonsense were proclaiming that Jesus was alive, that God had reversed the laws of nature and raised his Son from the dead. In the space of a few decades, Christianity went from being the niche beliefs of a handful of men and women in Jerusalem to something embraced by thousands of people across the ancient world. In time, this tiny start-up religion ended up shaking the entire Roman Empire. And in those same decades, 10 of Jesus' 11 closest followers died because they claimed Jesus had risen. So seriously did they take the claim that Jesus was alive that they were willing to be killed for it. So what had changed? What caused this huge paradigm shift, so that they went from dismissing the resurrection as nonsense to giving up their lives for it? Here's what happened next, that same Sunday evening as the disciples were gathering together. Verses 36 to 44 of Luke 24. Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and frightened, thinking they saw a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you troubled? And why do doubts rise in your minds? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones. As you see, I have." When he had said this, he showed them his hands and feet. And while they still did not believe it, because of joy and amazement, he asked them, "Do you have anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. He said to them, "This is what I told you while I was still with you. Everything must be fulfilled that is written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms." Jesus gave them, and he gives us evidence. Proof after proof that it's really him, really risen. Just in that one episode in that room, he appeared to them. He spoke to them. He pointed to the nail marks in his hands and feet. He invited them to touch him to check. And then he ate something. And he told them that what had happened had been predicted hundreds of years before by prophets like Isaiah. That he truly was and is the one whom God had promised to send, the one who had been given to bring light to the darkness. And that's just on this one occasion. Jesus was seen and spoken to on numerous occasions, sometimes by small groups and at least once by a gathering of hundreds. This is why the first followers of Jesus were willing to die for the claim that he was alive. They weren't just prepared to die for something they believed to be true, like martyrs of a religion or cause today. They were willing to die because of something they'd seen to be true. There's a big difference. There's plenty more I could say about the evidence that Jesus really did rise from the dead. People have written whole books about it. But even after these few brief paragraphs, I hope you're beginning to see that it actually stacks up, that we're dealing with the realm of fact, not fairy tale. Here's another way to think about it. Ask yourself, is there a better historical explanation for the events of the first Easter Sunday that are uncontested? First, there's the empty tomb. Not even Jesus' enemies denied at the time that the body was gone. So if Jesus did not rise again, where did his body go? If the authorities had taken it, surely they would have produced it when Jesus' friends started talking about a resurrection. If the disciples had taken it, surely at least one of them would have admitted it when they started being imprisoned, tortured, and worse for their claims. Second, there's the transformation in Jesus' followers and the explosive growth of Christianity in the first century. They went from a small crew of defeated, terrified men and women cowering behind a locked door to a rapidly growing network of groups confidently and joyfully talking about Jesus, even when faced with death. So confidently and joyfully, in fact, that their teaching revolutionized first the Eastern Mediterranean, then the Roman Empire, and in time the world, changing the way people thought about the value of life, the equality of all people, the nature of relationships, the way to use power. The list goes on. Incidentally, if you'd like to know more about how the values we all hold to today were prompted and shared by the Christian message, a fascinating book to read is The Air We Breathe by Glenn Scrivener, published by the Good Book Company, 2022. What else could have caused that? What other explanation fits the facts so well? My point is this. To believe in the resurrection is not to follow a preconception or prejudice. It is to follow the historical evidence. The Bible doesn't ask you to shut your eyes and make a leap of faith. Instead, it encourages you to open your eyes, look at the evidence and make a step of faith. True faith is not believing something in spite of the evidence. It is believing something in spite of the consequences. Because if this is true, then it's wonderful. It changes everything. Needle and thread. If Jesus rose from the dead, then it is the ultimate proof that he really is the mighty God and the Prince of Peace whom Isaiah promised. And his resurrection is also significant because it hints at the third of the four titles Isaiah gave him. If Jesus came back from the dead, he's everlasting, and he offers to be our everlasting Father. I don't know what kind of dad you have or had. Maybe you had a great dad. Maybe yours just wasn't there, or if he was, you wished he hadn't been. But the image of the everlasting Father, the image of any good father in the Bible, is of someone who sorts things out. They care for you and about you. They get things done and they make sure their family's protected. That's what a dad should do, and so that's what the title, Everlasting Father, tells us about who Jesus is and what he does. He sorts out eternity, and he does so by sorting out the problem of death. If Jesus got through death and into life beyond it, he can get me through it too. In his resurrection, Jesus is like a needle that goes through a tapestry, and we're like the thread. He bursts through death and comes through the other side, and if we're attached to him, we follow through. Yes, we'll still die, but like Jesus, we'll burst through into glorious new life on the other side. Here, then, is the answer to death that we all need. With Jesus, death is not a dead end. It's a doorway out into the paradise that Jesus promised that criminal as they hung on their crosses, which means we don't have to downplay or deny or despair at death. Jesus has defeated death. His resurrection is a glimpse of the resurrection that each of us can experience if we're attached to him. When, as a pastor, I lead a funeral, one of the most comforting, hope-filled moments is when I say at the start, Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. Because when Jesus said that, he was saying, you can trust me with your death. Real purpose. But it's not just that. As our everlasting Father, Jesus invites us to be part of the family business. He gives us work to do, work with an everlasting impact. As I was catching up with that friend at our school reunion, it became clear that he'd been looking in all sorts of places for a sense of purpose, and that in the end it had all felt a bit pointless. Then it was time for me to share where life had taken me. It was at this point in the conversation that he shook his head and said, I've spent my life just going from one thing to another. I've just lived. Then he added, but you've had real purpose. At the risk of sounding boastful, I can say that he's right. Not because I've done a better job than him of manufacturing a purpose for myself, but because I'm a Christian. And Christians have been given the answer to that nagging question. What is it all for? I remember the moment when I discovered it. Not long after I became a Christian, a friend showed me a verse from the Bible that totally changed my perspective. It's from part of the Bible where Paul, the writer, has just finished explaining about the evidence for the resurrection and how this guarantees that Christians will also live beyond death. Then he finishes by explaining how that hope for the future transforms what we do in the present. And it's from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 58. Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labour in the Lord is not in vain. Reading that verse for the first time was a real light bulb moment for me. Jesus' resurrection gave me hope in the face of death. And that meant that the idea of death no longer sapped life of all meaning. Nothing was in vain, and everything I did could be part of something that would last beyond my lifetime. The work of the Lord. I had a purpose to live for because I had a person to live for. Jesus Christ, the mighty God, everlasting Father and Prince of Peace. Jesus' resurrection means everything. It means everything I do has meaning, not because of what I do, but because of who I do it for. And Jesus extends that same invitation to you, to spend your life building something that lasts forever. This sounds stark, but the truth is that if we find our significance in anything else, it will eventually let us down. But this won't. The resurrection is the great answer, the only answer to John Paul Sartre's claim that there is no reason for existing. The resurrection says that in fact there is a reason. It's to do things that matter for eternity. An eternity that anyone who trusts Jesus will themselves get to enjoy. Our lives can be more than a few short sentences in the great sweep of history. We won't be scrunched up and forgotten once we're gone, discarded as meaningless. Instead, our lives can have real meaning. When we live with Jesus as our everlasting Father, all that we do with him and for him is woven into his bigger story. A story that does not end with death, but only gets better beyond it. And chapter 5, Confidence. I, the author, love Christmas lights. That is the author, love Christmas lights. The church I work for in the centre of London is yards from Oxford Street, one of the busiest shopping streets in the country, with a Christmas lights budget to match. I love walking down it, looking up at the lights against the backdrop of the night sky, while the shoppers and tourists and commuters bustle about below them. The long-forgotten reason for the tradition of hanging lights in our streets, on our houses and on our trees each December is to remind us that Christmas is about a great light that came and shone against the backdrop of deep darkness. Every year at Christmas we hear those words from Isaiah in traditional carol services. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. Why? Because at the first Christmas a child was born who was the mighty God, the Prince of Peace and the everlasting Father. Jesus gives hope, because he's the mighty God with the power to meet our deepest needs. Jesus offers peace because he's the Prince of Peace, who tears down the barrier between us and God. And Jesus brings purpose because he's the everlasting Father, whose defeat of death gives life the meaning we long for. So here's my question in this last chapter. Will you ask Jesus to be for you the fourth description Isaiah gave him, your wonderful counselor? Better and safer. Sometimes life is confusing. We face decisions that we know will affect our lives in huge ways, and we don't know what route to take. We struggle with questions that we know matter greatly to ourselves and our loved ones. But our lives are only ever a best guess. We wrestle with a sense of regret at a path not taken. Life is often not a well-lit free-lane highway. It often feels like a dark country lane that we have to navigate without GPS. In other words, we need what Isaiah would call a counsellor, someone who directs you through life, the one you view as the authoritative expert, the person whose advice you always listen to. All of us treat someone as our counsellor. It may be a parent, a partner, a guru, a celebrity. Most often it's simply ourselves, our own sense of what's right for us. But there's no counsellor as wonderful as Jesus. After all, no one else understands this world better than the one who made it. No one else understands us as well as the one who formed us. No one else sees the future as clearly as the one who directs it. And no one else has proved themselves to be as trustworthy as the one who chose to be born into the mess of this world and to die on a cross simply because he loves us. Who else would be a better candidate to tell us how to walk through this life, in all its ups and downs, joys and sadnesses? There's a great confidence to be enjoyed here. If Jesus is your counsellor, you no longer need to base your most important decisions on a best guess, whether yours or someone else's. You no longer need to lie awake worrying about taking a wrong turn. You no longer need to try to fake it till you make it, or hold the big questions at arm's length because you don't know how to answer them. You can simply let Jesus be God in your life. You can simply trust Jesus to be your wonderful counsellor. You can simply enjoy knowing that he knows what's best and can show you what's best as you seek to live life his way. And you can be sure that if you do mess things up, he'll be there, showing you how to pick up the pieces. Living this way makes all the difference when things are dark. At the start of the Second World War in 1939, as Britain faced Christmas with conflict raging and the future uncertain, King George VI, the father of the late Queen Elizabeth II, gave his traditional Christmas speech. He quoted from a poem by Minnie Louise Haskins, From God Knows, also known as The Gate of the Year, published in 1912. And I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, "Give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown." And he replied, "Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That shall be to you better than light and safer than a known way." No one who puts their hand into Jesus' hand and asks him to lead them through the next year, through the whole of their life, and ultimately through their death ever has reason to regret it. The gift you need. So here is the question to take away at the end of this book. What kind of gift do you think the baby born at the first Christmas really is? Back in November 2010, one family received an early Christmas present when they sold a vase at auction that had been in the family for years and that they had recently inherited. It turned out it was a mid-18th century Chinese Guanlong vase. When it came up for auction, it sold for £53 million. 53 million! One vase worth millions. When I heard about this, I became excited. My grandmother spent her childhood in Singapore, and she had left me a very old vase. Here was my ticket out of the rest of my working life. I started to look at the price of property in Bermuda, but then I actually asked someone who knows about these things how much my grandmother's vase was worth. They had a look and told me its real value. Suffice to say, I still work 6 days a week and we still haven't been to Bermuda. Most people go through life thinking Jesus is like my vase. If he even existed at all, he's an irrelevance. His birth is an excuse to take a few days off and learn to pull fake smiles when we're given bubble bath we don't want or socks we don't need, and that's it. But if Jesus is in fact the one whom Isaiah promised and who he himself claimed to be, if Jesus rose from the dead to prove it, then you are looking at a gift more like that Kwanlong vase. Perhaps you heard about him before, years ago, but never realised his worth. Perhaps he's been on the periphery of your thoughts for a long time, but you've never understood his value. But if Jesus is who he says he is, then he offers what no amount of money could ever buy. If he's the mighty God who can give us hope, the Prince of Peace who can give us forgiveness, the everlasting Father who can give us purpose, and the wonderful Counselor who can give us confidence in life, then he's the one that we've all deep down been searching for. He's the one we all truly need. If you could have anything this Christmas, what would you ask for? What would be on your ultimate wish list? My guess is that more than any possession, more even than any change in circumstances, you'd love to enjoy a life of hope, peace, purpose, and confidence. You'll find all of these if you discover who the baby in the manger was and is. And all you need to do with him is what you do with any present. Accept it, say thank you for it, and enjoy it. To us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. What do you want for Christmas? And so we come to what next? Well, the author says, thanks for reading this far. As you finish, it's worth asking yourself, what next? Maybe you would like to look at Jesus some more before you make your mind up about him. If that's you, I'd love you to do two things. First, read a gospel, a historical account of Jesus' life. Why not read the rest of Luke, the gospel this book has focused on? Second, pray. Speak to God and ask him if he is there to help you see the reality of who he is. There are two other things you could do. Go to a website, ChristianityExplored.org. Allows you to keep thinking about Jesus in your own way at your own pace. Or you could join an informal course based on the themes of this book called Hope Explored, where you can hear more and ask questions, discuss or simply listen. You can find a course near you on that website. Perhaps, though, you are at the point where you'd like to ask Jesus to be your wonderful counselor, to help forgive and lead you. Here are a few words that you could say to him now. Jesus, I am accepting you, the mighty God, as my wonderful counselor. Thank you that you died to give me peace with you and rose again to give me an eternal life with you beyond death. I am sorry that I have not let you call the shots in my life. Thank you for forgiving me, and please help me live with you in charge of my decisions and my direction in life from now on. Amen. Thanks again for reading. Rico. So, that was part 2 of the ultimate Christmas wish list. And I hope it's done some of us, if not all of us, good as you've listened. And so may God bless you all. Amen.